The gunshot that killed Julia Thompson's husband echoed through the canyon and left her world silent, except for the whimpering of their 6-month-old daughter cradled in her arms. It was 1878 in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and justice rarely found men who killed over land disputes in territories where lawmen were scarce, and bullets settled arguments faster than courts ever could. Samuel Thompson had been shot in the back by cattle baron Harold Crenshaw's hired guns, left to bleed out on their modest homestead while Julia hid in the root cellar with baby Charlotte, her hand pressed over the infant's mouth to muffle her cries. 7 years passed like dust through an hourglass. Each grain marking another day Julia struggled to keep their farm running, to keep food on the table, to keep Charlotte clothed and loved, despite the whispers that followed them through town. The whispers that said Samuel had been a coward, that he had run from a fair fight, lies spread by Crenshaw to justify murder. Julia knew the truth, but swallowing her rage became a daily ritual, necessary for survival in a town where speaking against powerful men could get you run out or worse. Charlotte turned 7 in the spring of 1885. A bright-eyed girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn chin, old enough now to understand that other children had fathers who taught them to ride, who lifted them onto their shoulders, who chased away nightmares. Julia tried to be both parents, working herself to exhaustion tending their small herd of cattle and chickens, mending fences, fixing the roof when storms tore shingles loose. Her hands grew calloused and her back ached constantly. But she refused to sell the land Samuel had died for, refused to give Crenshaw the satisfaction of taking what he had murdered to obtain. The morning it happened, Julia had sent Charlotte into town with a list and coins tied in a handkerchief, old enough now to purchase supplies from the general store, while Julia stayed behind to repair a broken wagon wheel. Charlotte skipped down the dirt road in her faded blue dress, the one Julia had let out twice already to accommodate her growing frame, her boots scuffed but sturdy, her brown braids bouncing against her shoulders. She hummed a tune her mother sang while cooking, something about a mockingbird and a diamond ring, innocent and unaware that cruelty often found the vulnerable in places where they should have been safe. The general store smelled of tobacco and leather, flour and coffee beans, familiar scents that usually made Charlotte feel grown up and important. She approached the counter with her list held high, standing on her tiptoes to see over the edge where Mr. Peterson tallied accounts in his ledger. He smiled at her kindly, one of the few townspeople who remembered Samuel Thompson as a good man rather than the lies painted over his memory. "Well, hello there, Miss Charlotte. What can I get for you today?" She recited her mother's list carefully, concentrating on each item: flour, sugar, salt, coffee, thread, and lamp oil. Mr. Peterson gathered the supplies while she examined jars of hard candy near the window, knowing she did not have extra coins for such luxuries, but enjoying the rainbow of colors nonetheless. That was when she heard the laughter, sharp and mocking, from the doorway behind her. "Look, it is the girl with no papa," Henry Crenshaw said, 13 years old and already cruel like his father, flanked by 2 other boys who followed him like pilot fish trailing a shark. "Tell me, Charlotte, where is your papa?" "Oh wait, he ran away because he was too scared to face my father like a man." Charlotte's face burned hot, her small fists clenching at her sides. "My papa did not run away. He was murdered." Henry laughed louder, stepping closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "That is what cowards always say. My pa says your father was yellow-bellied, that he squealed like a pig when he realized real men were coming for him. No wonder you have got no papa. Even dead cowards do not want to claim their brats." Tears stung Charlotte's eyes, but she refused to let them fall, refused to give this boy the satisfaction of seeing her break. Mr. Peterson started to intervene, but Henry's father was one of the wealthiest men in the territory, and speaking against his son carried risks, even for established businessmen. Charlotte grabbed her supplies, the parcels clutched against her chest, and pushed past Henry toward the door, his laughter following her like a curse. She made it halfway down the wooden sidewalk before the tears came, hot and furious, blurring her vision as she stumbled toward the hitching post where their old mare waited patiently. She tried to secure the parcels to the saddle with trembling hands, but the twine would not cooperate, her fingers clumsy with emotion. The packages tumbled to the dusty ground, flour splitting open in a white explosion that covered her boots and dress hem. "God damn it," she whispered, words she had heard her mother say when the world felt too heavy, then immediately felt guilty for cursing, even quietly. "That is quite the mess you have got there." The voice came from behind her, deep and gentle, masculine but not threatening. Charlotte spun around, wiping at her eyes quickly, not wanting another witness to her humiliation. The man stood about 6 feet tall, wearing worn denim pants and a simple cotton shirt, a leather vest over top, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face from the mid-morning sun. His gun belt sat easy on his hips, well used but not flashy, the mark of someone who wore weapons out of necessity rather than pride. When he crouched down to her level, she saw his face clearly. Weathered tan skin, a strong jaw with a few days of stubble, eyes the color of whiskey that held something like kindness, maybe early 30s, old enough to have seen hardship but young enough that it had not destroyed him. "Let me help you with this," he said, gathering the spilled flour back into the torn sack, his movements efficient and careful. "Looks like you have had a rough morning." Charlotte sniffed, trying to compose herself to be brave like her mother always insisted. "I am fine. I can manage." "I am sure you can," he agreed, not patronizing, just stating fact. "But sometimes it is all right to accept help when it is offered. No shame in that." He retrieved the other parcels, securing them properly to her saddle with practiced knots, checking the buckles and straps with the attention of someone who understood that poorly secured supplies could mean disaster on a long ride home. Charlotte watched him warily, taught to be cautious around strangers but sensing something in this man that felt safe, trustworthy in a way she could not quite articulate. "Why were you crying?" he asked after a moment, his tone casual, not demanding an answer but offering space for one. Charlotte hesitated, then the words tumbled out before she could stop them, the hurt too fresh to contain. "Henry Crenshaw said my papa was a coward. He said my papa ran away and squealed like a pig, but it is not true. My papa was good and brave, and they killed him and took everything, and nobody cares because Mr. Crenshaw has money and we do not." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his hand stilling on the saddle strap. "Henry Crenshaw said that, did he? The boy or the father?" "The boy, but he says what his father tells him." Charlotte wiped her nose on her sleeve, a gesture her mother would have scolded but which seemed unimportant now. "Everyone in town says I have no father, like it is my fault, like I did something wrong. I hate it here." The stranger finished securing her supplies, then stood, dusting off his hands on his pants. He looked down the street toward the general store where Henry Crenshaw and his friends still loitered, laughing about something, probably still mocking her. The man's expression hardened in a way that made him look dangerous despite his earlier gentleness, the transformation subtle but complete, like watching a working dog catch the scent of wolves. "Wait here a moment," he said to Charlotte, then strode purposefully toward the general store. Charlotte's heart hammered as she watched him approach the boys, his gait loose-limbed and deceptively casual, the walk of someone confident in their ability to handle whatever came next. Henry saw him coming and straightened, trying to look tough, but uncertainty flickered across his young face when the cowboy stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Henry had to crane his neck upward to maintain eye contact. "You, Henry Crenshaw?" the man asked, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet street. "Yeah. Who are you?" "Name is William Hayes. I am nobody important, just a man passing through, but I heard you saying some ugly things to that little girl back there, and I think you owe her an apology." Henry laughed, though it sounded nervous. "You cannot tell me what to do. My father owns half this territory." "Your father is not here right now. Right now it is just you and me and the choice you are about to make." William's hand rested lightly on his gun belt, not threatening exactly, just present, a reminder. "You can apologize to that girl for being cruel about her dead father, or you can deal with me. Your choice." The other boys backed away slightly, sensing danger, understanding on some instinctive level that William Hayes was not someone to trifle with. Henry's face flushed red, caught between pride and self-preservation, his young mind calculating odds and not liking the results. "I was just joking," Henry muttered, unable to meet William's steady gaze. "Jokes are supposed to be funny. Making a child cry about her murdered father is not a joke, it is cruelty, and I've got no patience for cruel boys who think money makes them untouchable." William's voice dropped lower, hard as iron. "Now you are going to walk over there and apologize properly, and then you are going to think real hard about what kind of man you want to become, because right now you are heading down a path that ends badly." Henry looked toward the store as if hoping for rescue, but Mr. Peterson stood in the doorway watching, offering no assistance. The boy swallowed hard, then walked slowly toward where Charlotte stood by her mare, William following close behind. Charlotte's eyes widened as they approached, confusion and hope warring on her small face. "I am sorry," Henry said stiffly, the words forced but audible. "I should not have said those things about your father. It was wrong." Charlotte stared at him, then nodded once, accepting if not quite believing. Henry hurried away quickly, his friends scrambling after him, their laughter silenced. William watched them go, then returned his attention to Charlotte, his expression softening again. "You all right now?" he asked. Charlotte nodded slowly, processing what had just happened, the unprecedented experience of someone defending her, standing up for her against people who usually went unchallenged. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said simply. "World has got enough meanness in it without letting it slide when we can do something about it." He checked the sun's position, calculating time. "Where is home for you? Maybe I should make sure you get back safely, make sure those boys do not bother you on the road." "Just a few miles west, the Thompson homestead." She paused, then added quietly, "We do not have much. Mama works real hard, but things have been difficult since Papa died. I am not looking for payment, just making sure you get home in one piece." He untied his horse from the hitching post, a sturdy roan gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. "Lead the way, Miss Charlotte." They rode in companionable silence, Charlotte on her old mare and William on his roan, keeping an easy pace that accommodated her less experienced horsemanship. The Oklahoma landscape stretched around them, rolling plains dotted with scrub brush and wildflowers, the sky vast and blue overhead. After a while, Charlotte's natural curiosity overcame her shyness. "Are you a real cowboy, Mr. Hayes?" William smiled slightly. "I suppose so. I have worked cattle most of my life, drifted from ranch to ranch depending on the season and the work available. Not much exciting about it really, just long days and sore muscles." That sounds exciting to me, Charlotte said wistfully. Better than being stuck in town with mean boys and people who whisper about you. People whisper because they have got small lives and smaller minds. You cannot control what they say, but you can control whether you let it define you. He glanced at her, this small, fierce girl with tear stains on her cheeks and determination in her eyes. Your papa, what was his name? Samuel Thompson. Mama says he was the best man she ever knew, that he worked hard and treated people fairly and loved us more than anything. Charlotte's voice caught. I was just a baby when he died. I do not remember him at all, not really, just what Mama tells me. Sometimes I try to imagine his face, but it never seems real, just like a story she tells. Sounds like he was lucky to have a family that remembers him with love. That is more than a lot of men get. William rode quietly for a moment, then added, For what it is worth, from what you have told me, it sounds like your father was brave. It takes courage to stand up to men like the Crenshaws, to defend what is yours. Takes even more courage to build a life worth defending in the first place. Charlotte absorbed this, treasuring these words about a man she had never known. Validation from a stranger who had no reason to lie to make her feel better. They crested a small rise, and her home came into view. A modest farmhouse with a barn and corral, fences that needed mending, and fields that could have been more productive with more hands to work them. Laundry hung on a line near the house, flapping in the breeze like surrender flags, and chickens pecked in the yard, oblivious to human struggles. Julia Thompson straightened from where she had been working on the wagon wheel, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, squinting against the sun to see who approached with her daughter. William felt something shift in his chest as he took her in. This woman in a simple cotton dress with her sleeves rolled up, her dark blonde hair escaping its pins to curl around her face. Maybe 26 or 27 years old, still young but with the kind of weariness that came from carrying too much alone for too long. She was beautiful in an unadorned way, strong features and clear eyes, the kind of beauty that came from character rather than vanity. Charlotte, Julia called, concern sharpening her voice as she moved toward them. What happened? Why is there a stranger with you? Charlotte slid from her mare and ran to her mother, the story pouring out in a rush. Henry Crenshaw's cruelty, the spilled supplies, William's intervention and insistence on seeing her safely home. Julia listened with her hands on her daughter's shoulders, her expression cycling through anger, gratitude, and wariness. The complicated math of a woman who had learned to be suspicious of help, because it often came with strings attached. William dismounted respectfully, removing his hat, giving Julia space to decide whether he was welcome or threat. Madam, I am William Hayes. I apologize for intruding on your day. I just wanted to make sure Charlotte got home without any further trouble. Julia studied him for a long moment, taking in his worn but clean clothes, his respectful demeanor, the way he held himself with quiet confidence but not aggression. Her instincts, honed by years of navigating a world hostile to widows, told her this man was different from the usual rough types who drifted through territories like tumbleweeds, following work or running from consequences. Thank you for defending my daughter, Mr. Hayes, she said finally, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone raised further east before the frontier claimed her. That was kind of you, especially against the Crenshaw boy. His father does not take kindly to anyone challenging his family. I am not much concerned with what Harold Crenshaw thinks, William replied evenly. I saw a child being hurt, and I did what anyone decent should do. Not many people in Stillwater would agree with your definition of decent when it comes to crossing the Crenshaws. Julia's expression remained guarded, but something in her eyes softened slightly. Would you like some water? Coffee? It is the least I can offer for your trouble." William hesitated, sensing she was being polite rather than genuinely welcoming, but his canteen was nearly empty and the sun was climbing toward noon, heat already shimmering off the dirt. "Water would be appreciated, thank you." Julia sent Charlotte to the well while she invited William to sit on the porch steps, maintaining propriety by keeping distance between them. He sat carefully, setting his hat beside him, looking out over her property with the practiced eye of someone who understood farming and ranching. He could see where she had tried to keep up with maintenance, the evidence of her labor everywhere, but also the signs of struggle, the tasks too big for one woman no matter how determined. "How long have you been managing alone?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question. Too personal, too presumptuous. But Julia answered anyway, perhaps tired of pretending everything was fine. 7 years. Since my husband Samuel was murdered over a land dispute that never even made it to trial. Bitterness edged her words, old wounds that had never properly healed. Harold Crenshaw wanted our water access for his cattle. Samuel refused to sell. 3 days later he was shot in the back and the sheriff ruled it self-defense, claimed Samuel drew first, which was a lie. But Crenshaw pays the sheriff's salary, so that was the end of it. Charlotte returned with a ladle of cool well water, which William accepted gratefully, drinking deeply. The girl sat next to her mother, close and protective, this child who had learned too young that the world could be cruel and arbitrary. "Thank you," William said, handing back the ladle. He looked at Julia directly honest. "I am sorry for your loss, and I am sorry justice failed you." That seems to happen a lot out here, men with money buying whatever outcome suits them. "You sound like you have seen it before," Julia observed, "too many times." William's jaw tightened. "I have worked ranches from Texas to Montana, seen big outfits squeeze out homesteaders, seen hired guns terrorize families, seen the law look the other way when there is enough money changing hands. It never sits right, but one drifter usually cannot do much to change it." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that felt less awkward than companionable, 3 people who understood hardship in different ways. William noticed the wagon wheel still disassembled, the spoke clearly cracked beyond simple repair. "That wheel needs a new spoke," he said, nodding toward the wagon. "You have got a replacement, or do you need to shape one?" Julia sighed. "I need to shape one, which means a trip into town to the lumber yard, which means dealing with more whispers and overpriced wood, because they know I have no choice but to pay." "I could fix it for you," William offered before thinking better of it. "I have done plenty of wagon repair over the years. Would not take more than a few hours if you have got some decent wood around." Julia's first instinct was to refuse, pride and caution warring in her chest. But practicality won out, the exhausted calculus of a woman with too much to do and too little time. "I have some wood in the barn, but I could not pay you much. Maybe dinner and whatever coins I can spare." "Not looking for payment," William said, already standing, retrieving his hat. "Consider it thanks for the water and a chance to do something useful. Been riding for 3 weeks without much purpose, feels good to have a task." Julia wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the independence she had fought so hard to preserve, but Charlotte was looking up at William like he had hung the moon, and the wagon wheel really did need fixing, and sometimes accepting help was not weakness but wisdom. "All right then, Mr. Hayes. The barn is through there, tools are on the bench against the north wall." William nodded and headed toward the barn, his long strides eating up the distance. Charlotte started to follow, but Julia caught her arm gently. "Help me with lunch instead, sweet girl. We need to let Mr. Hayes work in peace." Charlotte obeyed reluctantly, casting backward glances toward the barn as Julia led her inside their modest home. The interior was clean but sparse, furniture worn but well cared for, everything in its place with the meticulous organization of someone who could not afford to lose or misplace necessities. Wildflowers sat in a jar on the kitchen table, Charlotte's addition, a small brightness in an otherwise austere space. Julia moved through meal preparation automatically, slicing bread, checking the pot of beans that had been simmering since morning, her mind elsewhere. She moved to the window where she could see the barn, watched William emerge with wood and tools, settling cross-legged near the broken wagon to work. His movements were efficient and practiced, measuring twice, cutting once, the kind of capable competence that came from years of hard-earned experience. "I like him, Mama," Charlotte said quietly from her seat at the table. "He made Henry apologize. Nobody has ever done that before." "He seems like a good man," Julia agreed cautiously. "But good men passing through are still passing through, Charlotte. Do not get too attached." But even as she said it, Julia felt something twist in her chest, a feeling she had not experienced in 7 years, had not allowed herself to experience because hope hurt worse than resignation when it was inevitably disappointed. William Hayes was handsome in a rugged way, yes, but more than that he was kind and competent, and he had defended Charlotte without expectation of reward. That combination felt dangerous in its appeal, tempting her to want things she had sworn off after Samuel died. She forced herself to focus on cooking, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, watching William work. Charlotte chattered about the morning's events, embellishing slightly in the way children did, making William's intervention sound even more heroic than it had been. Julia listened with half her attention, making appropriate sounds, but mostly she wondered about this stranger who had appeared like something from one of Charlotte's fairy tales, solving problems with quiet strength. 2 hours later, William knocked on the doorframe, the wagon wheel repaired and reattached, his shirt damp with sweat despite the barn's shade. Julia invited him to wash at the pump, provided a clean towel that was threadbare but fresh, tried not to notice the muscles in his forearms as he scrubbed dirt from his hands and face. She had not been with a man since Samuel died, had not even thought about it beyond vague, abstract longings in the deep night when loneliness felt suffocating. But watching William Hayes dry his face, water droplets caught in his dark hair, she felt the stirring of something she had thought buried with her husband. Dinner was simple: beans and cornbread with butter, coffee that was more chicory than actual coffee but brewed strong enough to mask the substitution. William ate with genuine appreciation, complimenting the food in a way that felt sincere rather than patronizing. Charlotte dominated the conversation, peppering him with questions about his travels, the places he had seen, the adventures he had experienced. He answered patiently, editing his stories for a child's ears, making his life sound more romantic than the reality of bedrolls under open skies and beans cooked over campfires. "You have a family, Mr. Hayes?" Charlotte asked between bites of cornbread. "Charlotte, that is rude," Julia chided gently. "It is all right," William assured her. "No, I do not have a family. My parents died when I was 16. Fever took them both within a week of each other. Had a sister, but she married and moved to California years ago. We lost touch. Been on my own since, mostly. The ranches I work become family for a season, then I move on." "That sounds lonely," Charlotte said with the blunt honesty of children. "Sometimes it is," William admitted, glancing at Julia before returning his attention to Charlotte. "But it is the life I know, the life I am good at. Not everyone is meant to put down roots." Julia heard the slight wistfulness in his words, the suggestion that maybe he was not entirely satisfied with his wandering existence, but had convinced himself it was enough. She recognized that rationalization, had done it herself plenty of times, telling herself she did not need help, did not need companionship beyond Charlotte, that independence was better than the vulnerability of relying on anyone. After dinner, Charlotte insisted on showing William her treasures, a collection of interesting rocks, a bird's nest she had found intact after a storm, a tattered book of fairy tales Julia had managed to keep despite having to sell almost everything else of value. William examined each item with appropriate seriousness, asking questions, showing genuine interest in this child's small world. Julia cleaned up the dinner dishes, listening to their conversation, feeling her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, William prepared to leave. He saddled his roan, checked his supplies, obviously reluctant to impose further despite Julia's half-hearted invitation to sleep in the barn if he needed a roof for the night. "I appreciate the offer, but I saw a boarding house in town. I will find a room there," he said, though his eyes lingered on the small homestead, on Julia and Charlotte standing together on the porch. "Thank you for dinner. It was the best meal I have had in a long while." "Thank you for fixing the wagon," Julia replied, "and for defending Charlotte. I will not forget that kindness." William mounted his horse, settled his hat, looked like he wanted to say something more but could not find the words. Finally, he simply nodded, tipped his hat, and rode away into the gathering dusk. Charlotte waved enthusiastically until he disappeared over the rise, then turned to her mother with shining eyes. "Can he come back, Mama? Please?" Julia stroked her daughter's hair, her own heart unexpectedly heavy. "We will see, sweet girl. We will see." But that night, lying in her narrow bed, listening to Charlotte's soft breathing from the pallet nearby, Julia could not stop thinking about William Hayes. About his gentle competence, his quiet strength, the way he had made Charlotte laugh, the way he had looked at Julia like she was more than just a struggling widow barely keeping her head above water. She told herself it was foolish to read anything into one afternoon, one act of kindness from a drifting cowboy. But her heart, dormant for so long, had woken up, and denying it felt like lying to herself. In town, William secured a room at the boarding house, sparse and clean with a narrow bed and a washstand, better than sleeping rough but not by much. He should have kept riding, should have moved on to the next town, the next job, the pattern he had followed for years without question. But he kept seeing Charlotte's hopeful face, kept hearing Julia's voice edged with exhaustion and determination, kept feeling that strange pull, the sense that maybe he had stopped in Stillwater for a reason beyond simple chance. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the town settling for the night, trying to convince himself that leaving in the morning was the smart choice. Attachments were dangerous for men like him, men without prospects beyond their labor, men who owned little more than a horse and a gun and the clothes on their backs. Julia Thompson deserved better than a drifter, deserved stability and security, things William had never been able to provide anyone including himself. But he could not shake the memory of her eyes, gray-blue like storm clouds, tired but not defeated. Could not forget the way she had looked at him across the dinner table, wary but warming, like someone considering the possibility of trust after years of self-imposed isolation. He had known her barely half a day, and already she occupied his thoughts in ways that felt significant, dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff wondering what it would feel like to fall. Morning came with bright sunshine, and the decision William had known he would make despite all his logical arguments against it. He would stay in Stillwater, at least for a while. Would find work if possible, make himself useful, see if that strange connection he had felt with Julia and Charlotte had been real or just loneliness playing tricks. He dressed and went downstairs to the boarding house common room where breakfast was being served, coffee and biscuits with gravy. "You are new in town," the boarding house owner, Mrs. Patterson, observed as she poured his coffee. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a businesslike demeanor. "Passing through or looking for work. Depends on if there is work to find," William replied. "I've got ranch experience, farming, breaking horses, general labor, willing to do most anything legal." Mrs. Patterson considered him thoughtfully. "Johnson Ranch usually needs hands, especially coming into spring. It is about 5 miles north of town. Old Ben Johnson is fair to work for, pays decent, does not cheat his men. You might try there." "I appreciate the recommendation." William ate his breakfast methodically, formulating a plan. If he could secure steady work, he would have a legitimate reason to stay in the area, to perhaps see Julia and Charlotte again without it seeming strange or improper. The Johnson Ranch proved easy to find. A substantial operation with good grazing land and a large herd of cattle. William met with Ben Johnson, a grizzled man in his 60s with the weathered face of someone who had spent his entire life outdoors. They talked for half an hour, William explaining his experience, Johnson asking pointed questions to gauge competence and character. "You will do," Johnson finally said. "Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. Work is hard and the hours are long, but I treat my men fairly and feed them well. You start tomorrow if you want the job." William accepted, shaking Johnson's hand, feeling something settle in his chest. Stability, at least temporary, a base from which he could figure out what he was doing, what he wanted, whether the pull he felt toward Julia Thompson was worth pursuing. He spent the rest of the day purchasing a few necessities, establishing himself, trying not to think about riding out to the Thompson homestead, but ultimately giving in to the impulse as afternoon shadows lengthened. Julia was hanging laundry when she spotted a rider approaching, her hand immediately moving to the rifle she kept propped near the door, a necessary precaution for a woman alone. But as the rider drew closer, she recognized William's roan, felt her heart do something complicated and involuntary. She lowered the rifle, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance, her dress damp from washing, hair escaping its pins. Vanity, she scolded herself. You have no business caring what you look like, but she cared anyway. William dismounted respectfully, hat in hand, and Julia noticed he looked almost nervous, this capable man suddenly uncertain. "Mrs. Thompson, I apologize for dropping by unannounced. I wanted to let you know I found work at the Johnson Ranch. We'll be staying in the area for a while. I thought, if you were willing, I could stop by when I have time off, help with any repairs or heavy work you might need done. No payment necessary, just neighborly assistance." Julia's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself and Charlotte from the inevitable hurt when this man eventually left. But she was tired of refusing help, tired of carrying everything alone, tired of denying herself even small pleasures like company and conversation. And Charlotte had asked if William could come back, had looked at Julia with such hope that denying the request felt unnecessarily cruel. "That is very generous, Mr. Hayes," she said carefully. "I would not want to impose on your free time, but there are certainly tasks I could use help with if you are genuinely offering." "I am genuinely offering." His eyes met hers, warm and honest. "I know you have been managing alone for a long time, and you have done an admirable job. But there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely given. Mr. Hayes, Charlotte's delighted shout came from the barn where she had been collecting eggs. She ran toward them, basket swinging, face bright with joy at seeing William returned. "Mama, Mr. Hayes came back." "I see that, sweet girl." Julia could not help but smile at her daughter's exuberance, at the uncomplicated happiness of a child who had not yet learned to guard her heart. William crouched to Charlotte's level, admiring her basket of eggs, asking about her day with genuine interest. Julia watched them interact. This stranger who had appeared in their lives like an answer to prayers she had not dared to voice, and felt walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble despite her best efforts to shore them up. Over the following weeks, William became a fixture in their lives, stopping by on his days off, sometimes just for an hour, sometimes for most of the day. He repaired the barn door that had hung crooked for 2 years, fixed a leak in the roof Julia had been patching with tar, mended fences that had been on her list of impossible tasks. He taught Charlotte to ride properly, patient and encouraging, building her confidence until she could gallop without fear. He brought small gifts, candy from town for Charlotte, a new set of needles for Julia, a book he thought she might enjoy. Julia found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that frightened her, caught herself thinking about him while working, wondering what he was doing, whether he thought about her too. They talked while working side by side, shared meals, discovered common ground in their love of the land, their appreciation for hard work, their belief that people deserved fairness and respect regardless of their station. William made her laugh, something she had not done often in 7 years, his dry humor and gentle teasing reminding her she was more than just a widow and a mother, was still a woman with desires and dreams. Charlotte bloomed under the attention, this father figure who had appeared as if conjured by her loneliness. She followed William around like a shadow when he visited, chattering constantly, seeking his approval, his praise, his affection. He gave it freely. This man who claimed he had no family but who seemed to understand instinctively how to care for a child starved for paternal love. 2 months after William arrived in Stillwater, the spring social was announced. A town gathering with food and music and dancing, one of the few community events that brought everyone together. Charlotte begged to attend, looking at Julia with pleading eyes. "Please, Mama." "Mary Sutton says there will be cake and fiddle music and dancing. Please, can we go?" Julia hesitated, remembering previous socials where she and Charlotte had been largely ignored, relegated to the margins, whispered about. But Charlotte deserved normal childhood experiences, deserved to dance and eat cake and feel part of the community. "All right, we will go, but we will not stay long." The social was held in the church courtyard, lanterns strung between trees, tables laden with food contributed by families throughout the area, a small stage where musicians tuned their instruments. Julia wore her best dress, faded blue calico but clean and pressed, her hair styled carefully. Charlotte wore a new dress Julia had sewn from fabric William had purchased, claiming he owed someone a favor and they had paid him in goods. A transparent excuse, but one Julia had accepted, because refusing would have hurt Charlotte, who desperately wanted something new and pretty. They arrived as the sun set, golden light bathing everything in warm tones. Charlotte immediately spotted her few friends and ran off to play, leaving Julia to navigate the social dynamics alone. She helped arrange food, made polite conversation with other women who tolerated rather than welcomed her, felt the familiar isolation settling over her like a heavy coat. "Mrs. Thompson." She turned to find William standing behind her, cleaned up and handsome in a pressed shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing, his eyes warm as they took her in. Her heart stuttered in her chest, the rush of feeling so intense she felt dizzy. "Mr. Hayes, I did not know you would be here." Ben Johnson encourages his ranch hands to attend town socials, says it builds community. William smiled slightly. "I am glad I came. You look beautiful, Julia." It was the first time he had used her given name, the intimacy of it sending warmth through her. "Thank you," she managed, suddenly shy, feeling 17 instead of 27. The music started, a lively reel that had people moving toward the makeshift dance floor. William extended his hand. "Would you dance with me?" Julia glanced around, aware of eyes on them, of whispers starting. The scandal of the widow Thompson dancing with a ranch hand barely weeks after his arrival. But looking at William's hopeful expression, she found she did not care what people thought, was tired of living her life according to their judgments. "I would be delighted," she said, placing her hand in his. They danced, William proving surprisingly skilled, guiding her through the steps with easy confidence. Julia felt herself relaxing, laughing as they spun, the music and movement lifting her spirits, making her feel alive in ways she had forgotten were possible. Other couples joined them, the floor filling, but Julia barely noticed. Her attention focused entirely on William, on the way he looked at her like she was precious, important, worth cherishing. Charlotte watched from the sidelines, her eyes wide with wonder, seeing her mother happy in a way she could not remember witnessing before. But other children noticed too, including Henry Crenshaw, who stood nearby with his father, the cattle baron's expression dark as he watched William Hayes dancing with Julia Thompson. This outsider daring to involve himself with people Harold Crenshaw considered beneath his concern, yet also within his domain to control. The music ended and William escorted Julia back to the sidelines, his hand lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. They stood together, talking quietly, the connection between them palpable, drawing curious and disapproving looks in equal measure. Charlotte approached with a cup of lemonade, offering it to her mother, her expression hopeful. "Are you having fun, Mama?" "I am, sweet girl. Are you?" Charlotte nodded enthusiastically, but before she could elaborate, Henry Crenshaw appeared at her elbow, his father looming behind him, the boy's earlier forced apology clearly forgotten in the intervening weeks. "Still pretending you have got a papa, Charlotte." Henry sneered, emboldened by his father's presence. "Dancing with some drifter does not make him your father, just makes your mama look desperate." Harold Crenshaw laughed, the sound cruel and dismissive. "Boy has got a point. You should be careful, Thompson. Hayes here is just another saddle tramp looking for easy comfort. He will move on and leave you with even less than you have got now." Julia's face flushed with humiliation and rage, but before she could respond, William stepped forward, positioning himself between Charlotte and the Crenshaws, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his eyes hard as flint. "Mr. Crenshaw, I am going to give you one chance to apologize to Mrs. Thompson and her daughter for your disrespect," William said quietly, his voice carrying despite the music and conversation around them. One chance. Harold Crenshaw was a big man, used to intimidating people through size and wealth, unaccustomed to being challenged. He looked William up and down dismissively. "Or what, drifter? You will leave town. Save me the trouble of running you out." A crowd was gathering, people sensing confrontation, the social's festive atmosphere curdling into tension. Julia grabbed William's arm, feeling the muscle tense beneath her fingers. "William, do not. He is not worth it." But Charlotte was crying quietly, and William could not let it pass, could not watch this child he had come to care for being hurt by bullies who thought power gave them permission to be cruel. He gently removed Julia's hand from his arm, his eyes never leaving Harold Crenshaw's face. "Or I will make you apologize," William said simply. "Your choice." Harold Crenshaw laughed again, looking around for support from the crowd, expecting them to share his amusement at this nobody ranch hand's audacity. But the crowd was silent, watching, some faces showing anticipation rather than disapproval, townsfolk tired of Crenshaw's tyranny but too afraid to challenge it themselves. "You have got a big mouth for someone with nothing," Crenshaw said. "But that is all men like you have got, big talk and empty pockets." "Last chance," William repeated. Crenshaw moved suddenly, throwing a heavy punch meant to end the confrontation before it truly started. But William had spent years working with cattle and horses, had learned to read movement and intention, to react faster than thought. He ducked the punch easily, responded with a quick jab to Crenshaw's gut that doubled the bigger man over, then followed with a right cross that sent Crenshaw sprawling into the dirt. The crowd gasped, shocked that Harold Crenshaw, the most powerful man in the territory, was lying on the ground bleeding from a split lip. Henry ran to his father, helping him sit up, looking at William with fear and hatred. Crenshaw wiped blood from his mouth, his expression murderous. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Hayes," Crenshaw spat. "Nobody touches me and gets away with it. Nobody." "I am right here if you want to try again," William offered, still calm, still controlled, not even breathing hard. "Or you can apologize to Mrs. Thompson and Charlotte, and we can all go back to enjoying the evening." For a moment it could have gone either way, violence or capitulation, the crowd holding its breath. But Harold Crenshaw was not stupid despite his arrogance. He was embarrassed and angry, but fighting further would only compound his humiliation. He climbed to his feet, brushing dirt from his clothes, his face twisted with impotent rage. "This is not over," he promised, then stalked away, Henry scrambling after him. The crowd slowly dispersed, returning to food and music, but the mood was different now. Electric with the knowledge that someone had finally stood up to Harold Crenshaw and walked away without consequences, at least immediate ones. Julia stood frozen, processing what had just happened, fear and admiration warring in her chest. "You should not have done that," she said quietly to William. "Crenshaw will make you pay for that humiliation." "Maybe," William acknowledged. "But I could not stand there and watch him hurt Charlotte again. Some things are worth the cost." Charlotte threw her arms around William's waist, hugging him fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt. "Thank you for making him stop." William's hand came up to stroke her hair gently, protectively. Over Charlotte's head, his eyes met Julia's, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. A fierce tenderness directed not just at Charlotte but at her, a claiming that went beyond friendship, beyond neighborly assistance. "We should go home," Julia said, her voice unsteady. "Before there is more trouble." They left the social quietly, William insisting on escorting them despite it being miles out of his way. They rode in silence, Charlotte dozing in the saddle, exhausted by excitement and tears. The night was clear and cool, stars brilliant overhead, the kind of sky that made people feel small and significant simultaneously. At the Thompson homestead, William helped Charlotte down from her mare, carried the half-asleep child into the house, laid her gently on her bed while Julia removed her shoes. They returned to the porch together, suddenly alone in the moonlight, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. "Julia," William started, then stopped, struggling to find words for what he felt. "You should not have defended us," Julia interrupted. "Not because I do not appreciate it, I do, more than I can express. But Harold Crenshaw is dangerous, William. He killed my husband and got away with it. He will not tolerate what you did tonight. You need to leave Stillwater before he comes after you." "I am not leaving," William said firmly. I am not running from some bully who thinks money makes him untouchable, and I am not leaving you and Charlotte to face him alone. We have been facing him alone for 7 years. We will survive. But why should you have to just survive? Why should Charlotte have to endure being mocked and hurt because her father was murdered and nobody had the courage to seek justice? William took a step closer, his voice intense but gentle. You deserve better than barely scraping by, better than living in fear, better than being alone. Tears stung Julia's eyes, the walls around her heart crumbling completely. And what are you offering, William Hayes? You are a ranch hand, a drifter by your own admission. What future is there in that? I am offering whatever you will accept, William said quietly. If that is just my help around the farm, I will take it. If it is friendship, I will treasure it. If it is more, he paused, reached up to gently cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. If it is more, then I promise you I will spend every day proving I am worth the risk. Julia closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, the simple human contact almost unbearable after years of isolation. I am afraid, she whispered. Afraid to let myself feel anything, afraid to want more than survival. Afraid that you will leave, or worse, that Harold Crenshaw will destroy you like he destroyed Samuel. I am afraid too, William admitted. Afraid I am not good enough, not stable enough, not the man you and Charlotte deserve. But I know that since the moment I met you. I have thought about little else. You have gotten under my skin, Julia Thompson, you and your fierce daughter, and I do not want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had been brave enough to stay. Julia opened her eyes, looked at this man who had appeared in her life so unexpectedly, who had defended her daughter without hesitation, who was offering her possibilities she had thought forever closed. She made a choice, the kind of choice that required courage equal to facing down armed men. She kissed him. William responded instantly, his arms coming around her, pulling her close, the kiss deepening with the pent-up longing of two people who had been alone too long. Julia melted against him. 7 years of grief and loneliness pouring out through this connection, replaced by hope and desire, and the terrifying exhilaration of taking a leap into unknown future. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, William rested his forehead against hers. I am staying, Julia. Whatever comes, I am staying. You are not alone anymore, neither of you. Promise me, Julia demanded, needing to hear it, needing to believe it. Promise me you will not leave. I promise, William said solemnly. I promise you, Julia, and I promise Charlotte. I am here now, and I am not going anywhere. They stood together on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, neither willing to separate despite the late hour. Eventually, William forced himself to step back, to reclaim his hat, to mount his horse. I will come by tomorrow, he said. There is a section of fence on your east pasture that needs replacing before your cattle wander off. Julia laughed softly, the sound lighter than it had been in years. Always finding work to do, Mr. Hayes. William, he corrected. I think we are past formalities, do not you? William, she repeated, liking the feel of his name in her mouth. Tomorrow, then. She watched him ride away into the darkness, then stood alone under the stars for a long time, processing everything that had happened, the upheaval and promise this single day had contained. When she finally went inside, Charlotte was sitting up in bed, eyes bright in the dim light. Are you going to marry Mr. Hayes, Mama? Charlotte asked with the directness of children. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing Charlotte's hair. I do not know, sweet girl. It is too early to talk about such things. I think you should, Charlotte stated confidently. He is nice and he makes you smile, and he stood up to Henry and his horrible father. That means he is brave and good, and I think he would be a wonderful papa. Julia's heart ached with love for this optimistic child who still believed in happy endings despite their difficult years. We will see what happens. But Charlotte, you need to understand that even if William and I, she paused, choosing words carefully, even if we become more than friends, it does not mean he is replacing your papa. Samuel will always be your father. Nothing changes that. Charlotte considered this seriously. I know, Mama. But I think maybe a person can have more than one papa, the one they remember and the one who is here now. Is that okay? Yes, sweet girl, Julia said through tears. That is more than okay. Over the following months, the relationship between Julia and William deepened naturally, organically. Two people discovering they fit together in ways neither had expected to find. William continued working at the Johnson Ranch, but spent every free moment at the Thompson homestead, his presence transforming the struggling farm into something functional, then prosperous. He helped Julia expand her small cattle herd, negotiated fair prices at market, used his ranch connections to secure better deals than she had ever managed alone. Charlotte flourished. This child who had spent her first 7 years marked by absence now suddenly surrounded by presence, by someone who showed up consistently, who kept promises, who loved her without condition. William taught her to rope and ride, to read the weather, to understand the patterns of the land. He answered her endless questions with patience, attended her small triumphs with enthusiasm, became the father she had longed for without diminishing the father she had never known. Harold Crenshaw made good on his threats, attempting to intimidate William through various means, having the sheriff question him about fabricated crimes, spreading rumors about his character, pressuring Ben Johnson to fire him. But Johnson was one of the few ranchers in the territory powerful enough to resist Crenshaw's influence, and he had taken a liking to William, respected his work ethic and integrity. The rumors gained no traction because William's character spoke for itself. His actions in the community, building a reputation that withstood slander. Frustrated by indirect methods, Crenshaw tried direct confrontation, sending his hired men to the Thompson homestead one afternoon when he knew William would be there. 3 men rode up, armed and hostile, demanding William leave or face consequences. William met them outside, rifle in hand, his stance calm but ready. "You boys want to start something, I suggest you think it through carefully," William said evenly. "I am not looking for trouble, but I will finish whatever you start." The hired guns exchanged glances, recognizing in William something they had not expected, competence and a willingness to defend what he considered his. One of them, older and wiser than the others, shook his head slowly. "This is not worth dying over," he told his companions. "Hayes has not done anything illegal, just made Crenshaw look bad, which is not hard to do. I am not dying for another man's wounded pride." They rode away, and after that, Crenshaw's attempts to intimidate William ceased, the cattle baron apparently deciding that eliminating a popular ranch hand would bring more trouble than it was worth, especially since the sheriff had quietly warned him that another suspicious death would attract federal attention Crenshaw could not easily control. By the time autumn arrived, William had become an integral part of Julia and Charlotte's lives, his presence as natural as breathing. He had moved out of the boarding house and into the barn at the Thompson homestead, a practical arrangement that saved money and allowed him to be closer for security and convenience. Julia worried about appearances, about what people would say, but William pointed out that her reputation could hardly get worse, and anyone who truly mattered would understand their situation was born of necessity and respect, not impropriety. On a crisp October evening, after Charlotte had gone to bed, William and Julia sat together on the porch steps, watching the sun set in shades of amber and rose. They had settled into comfortable companionship, the early intense attraction mellowing into something deeper, more sustainable, built on shared labor and mutual respect as much as romance. "I have been thinking," William said, his voice contemplative, "about my future, our future if you are willing to include me in that consideration." Julia turned to look at him, her heart accelerating. "What have you been thinking?" "I have saved almost everything I have earned at the Johnson Ranch these past months. Between that and selling my horse and gear, I would have enough to make a down payment on the adjoining land to the south. The Peterson place. Old man Peterson died last spring and his kids want to sell, are motivated to close a deal quickly even if it means accepting less than full market value." William took Julia's hand, lacing their fingers together. "If I purchased that land, I could start my own small operation, run cattle, build a proper house. I would not be much, not at first, but it would be mine, would be something stable and permanent." Julia sat very still, afraid to hope, afraid to assume she understood where he was going with this explanation. "That sounds like a solid plan, William. You would make a success of it, I have no doubt." "It would be easier with a partner," William continued, then turned to face her fully, his expression serious and tender simultaneously. "Julia Thompson, I love you. I love your strength and your determination and the way you have survived things that would have broken lesser people. I love your daughter as if she were my own blood. I know I am not the most prosperous man, not the most educated or refined, but I promise you I will work every day to provide for you, to protect you, to be worthy of the trust you place in me." He paused, taking a breath. "I am asking you to marry me, to let me be your husband and Charlotte's father, to build a life together on that land and this land, to finally have the partnership and family we both deserve." Tears streamed down Julia's face, years of loneliness and struggle culminating in this moment, this offer of love and stability and forever. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, William Hayes, I will marry you. I love you too, have loved you probably since the day you defended Charlotte in town, but I was too scared to admit it. Yes, 1,000 times yes." William kissed her thoroughly, joyfully, then pulled back with a grin. "We should probably tell Charlotte before she overhears through the window and dies of excitement." Julia laughed through her tears. "She is definitely still awake and listening." Sure enough, when they entered the house, Charlotte was sitting at the top of the stairs, trying to look innocent but failing completely. She launched herself at William when she saw them, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "You are going to marry Mama. You are going to be my papa." William knelt to her level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "If that is all right with you. I know I cannot replace the father you lost, and I would never try. But if you will have me, I would be honored to be your papa from here forward, to be there for every moment I possibly can, to love you and your mama with everything I have." Charlotte looked at him seriously, this 7-year-old girl who had seen too much hardship but had somehow retained her ability to trust. "Can I call you Papa? I would be proud if you did," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "Then yes, I will have you. We will have you." Charlotte turned to Julia. "We get to keep him, Mama. We get to keep him forever." "Forever," Julia agreed, pulling them both into an embrace, this makeshift family that had found each other against unlikely odds, that had chosen each other despite all the practical reasons to remain separate and safe. They married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church, Ben Johnson standing as William's witness, Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house standing as Julia's. Charlotte wore her best dress and carried a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers. beaming throughout the ceremony. This child who had prayed for a father and received one through unexpected means. The town attended in surprising numbers, many people quietly supportive of Julia Thompson finding happiness, of William Hayes proving himself a man of character and commitment. Harold Crenshaw did not attend, but his absence felt more like relief than insult, his era of intimidation slowly waning as other families found courage to resist his overreach, inspired by William's example. The sheriff, recognizing the changing winds, became less pliable to Crenshaw's demands, more willing to enforce law fairly rather than favoring the highest bidder. William completed the purchase of the Peterson property, and over the winter he and Julia worked to build a new house, larger than her original homestead, positioned to oversee both properties. Ben Johnson helped, providing materials at cost and loaning ranch hands for the heavy construction. The community contributed in small ways, acknowledging that William and Julia's success represented possibility for everyone, proof that hard work and integrity could still prevail even in a territory where might often made right. Charlotte started school that winter, no longer the girl with no father but the daughter of William and Julia Hayes, protected by a name that carried respect. Henry Crenshaw tried once more to mock her, but Charlotte had grown in confidence, and her sharp retort made Henry's friends laugh at his expense rather than hers. After that, he left her alone, relegated to finding easier targets. By spring of 1886, the new house was complete, a modest but sturdy two-story structure with a real parlor and separate bedrooms, a kitchen with a proper stove, windows that let in abundant light. Julia cried the first time she walked through it finished, overcome by the contrast between this home and the desperate poverty she had endured for so many years. William held her, understanding without words, knowing that security and stability meant more to someone who had lived without them than any luxury could mean to someone born into comfort. They moved their combined herds to the new property, ran cattle successfully through that year, and the next, slowly building prosperity through careful management and relentless labor. William's reputation as a fair and capable rancher spread, and he began receiving offers to purchase stock, to partner on ventures, to join associations of local ranchers working together to resist pressure from larger outfits like Crenshaw's. Charlotte grew, no longer a sad-eyed child but a vibrant girl entering adolescence with confidence and joy, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and protected. She excelled in school, made friends easily, helped around the ranch with increasing competence. She remembered her birth father Samuel in stories Julia told, keeping his memory alive without dwelling in grief, able to honor where she came from while embracing where she was. 2 years after their marriage, Julia gave birth to a son, Samuel William Hayes, named for the father Charlotte had lost and the father she had gained. William wept when he held his son for the first time, this cowboy who had spent most of his life alone suddenly surrounded by family, by roots and permanence and love. Charlotte adored her baby brother, helped care for him with the fierce protectiveness of an older sibling who understood how precious family was. A year after Samuel's birth, Julia delivered twin daughters, Emma and Grace, completing their family in abundance that felt like the universe making up for early hardships. The house filled with noise and laughter, children's voices echoing through rooms that had been built with love and purpose. William moved through his days with quiet contentment, this man who had been drifting now anchored by responsibilities he had chosen and cherished. Harold Crenshaw died in 1889, thrown from his horse during a cattle drive, his death unremarkable and unmourned by most of the territory. Henry inherited the ranch but lacked his father's ruthless business sense, and within 3 years he had mismanaged the operation into bankruptcy, selling off parcels to cover debts. William and Julia purchased some of that land, expanding their own holdings. The irony not lost on anyone that the property Crenshaw had killed to control ultimately ended up in the hands of Samuel Thompson's widow. The turn of the century found the Hayes family well established and respected, their ranch prosperous, their children thriving. Charlotte, now 18 and beautiful, was being courted by the son of a neighboring rancher, a good young man William had carefully vetted and approved. Samuel at 11 showed his father's quiet competence with horses and cattle, already invaluable help around the ranch. The twins at 10 were wild and fearless, riding like they were born in saddles, keeping their parents simultaneously exasperated and delighted. On a warm evening in June 1900, William and Julia sat on the porch of the house they had built together, watching the sunset paint the Oklahoma sky in shades of fire and gold. 22 years had passed since Julia had hidden in a root cellar with baby Charlotte, since Samuel Thompson had been murdered and left his family vulnerable. 15 years since William Hayes had knelt before a crying 7-year-old girl and promised her she had a father now. "Do you ever regret it?" Julia asked, reaching for William's hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. "Giving up your drifting life to settle down with a struggling widow and her traumatized child?" William looked at her, this woman who had aged into even greater beauty, her face lined now but radiant with contentment, her hair streaked with silver but still thick and lovely. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, you and Charlotte and our babies, this is everything I never knew I needed. Everything I would have missed if I had kept running. Charlotte says she wants to name her first daughter Julia if she has a daughter after she marries Thomas," Julia said, leaning her head on William's shoulder. "She says she wants to honor the mother who taught her strength and the love story that saved us both." William kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "It was not just me saving you. You saved me too, gave me purpose and family and a reason to be better than I had been. We saved each other, Julia. That is what love does." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon, the land they had fought for and built upon spreading out around them in peaceful abundance. From inside the house came the sounds of their children preparing for bed, Samuel trying to convince the twins it was actually time to sleep. The girls giggling and resisting, normal family chaos that was the sweetest music William had ever heard. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, grown now but still their little girl in so many ways, her eyes soft as she looked at her parents. "Papa, Samuel wants to know if you will help him with the new foals tomorrow. He says they are getting big enough to start halter training." "Tell him I will meet him in the barn right after breakfast," William replied, still marveling at the word papa, at the privilege of being called father by this remarkable young woman who had first claimed his heart all those years ago. Charlotte nodded, then impulsively crossed the porch to hug them both. "I love you, both of you. Thank you for showing me what family should be, what love looks like. I will carry that forward in my own life, my own family someday." "We love you too, sweet girl," Julia murmured. "So much. You were the reason I kept fighting when everything seemed hopeless, and you were the reason your papa stayed when he could have kept drifting. You brought us together." After Charlotte went back inside, Julia and William remained on the porch, reluctant to surrender the peace of the evening. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear Oklahoma sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, every milestone of their years together. "Tell me again," Julia requested softly, something she asked occasionally when the memories of harder times pressed close. "Tell me about the day we met." William smiled, knowing this ritual, understanding her need to remember how far they had come. "I was drifting through Stillwater, no particular destination in mind, when I saw a little girl crying outside the general store, her supplies scattered in the dirt. She had the saddest eyes I had ever seen, but also the fiercest determination, trying so hard to be brave despite her hurt. I helped her gather her things, and she told me about cruel boys saying ugly things about her father." "And what did you do?" Julia prompted, though she knew the story by heart. "I made those boys apologize, made them see that cruelty has consequences even if their father had money and power. Then I rode that brave little girl home to make sure she was safe, and I met her remarkable mother, who had been keeping their family afloat through sheer will and determination for 7 long years." William pulled Julia closer. "I looked at you and something just clicked into place, like finding something I had been searching for without knowing it was lost. I knew I had to stay, had to find a way to be part of your lives. Charlotte asked me that night if we were going to get married," Julia remembered, smiling. "Before I even knew you were planning to stay in Stillwater. She knew before we did that you belonged with us. Smart girl, our Charlotte." "Our Charlotte," Julia echoed, loving the sound of that possessive, the unity it implied. They eventually went inside, checking on the children one last time before retiring to their own room. The twins were finally asleep, sprawled across their shared bed in careless innocence. Samuel was reading by lamplight, too engrossed in his adventure novel to notice his parents peek in. Charlotte's room was dark, the young woman already dreaming of her future, of continuing the legacy of love and strength her parents had built. In their bedroom, Julia and William prepared for sleep with the comfortable routine of long marriage. William hung his gun belt on its customary hook, habits from harder times persisting even as the need for constant vigilance diminished. Julia brushed out her hair, counting the strokes automatically, catching William's eye in the mirror and smiling at his appreciative gaze. "Still beautiful," he murmured, coming up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Still take my breath away after all these years." Julia leaned back against him, secure in his embrace in the life they had created together. "We have been blessed, William. Despite the hard beginning, despite all the obstacles, we have built something wonderful." "We have," he agreed. "And it all started with a little girl who needed defending and a man who was tired of being alone, and the courage you both had to let me into your lives." They climbed into bed, the same bed they had shared for 14 years, its familiarity a comfort rather than a bore. Julia curled into William's side, his arm around her, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart that had become the soundtrack of her life. "I love you, William Hayes," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you, Julia Hayes," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifting cowboy who did not know what he was missing until he found you." They drifted toward sleep, secure in each other and in the family they had built, in the legacy they would leave to their children and grandchildren, a legacy of resilience and love, of standing up to bullies, of keeping promises, of choosing courage over fear. The story that had begun with tears and mockery had transformed into something beautiful and enduring, proof that sometimes the most unlikely meetings lead to the most profound transformations. Outside, the Oklahoma night settled over the Hayes Ranch, peaceful and full of promise, the land they had fought for now prosperous and secure. The family they had built together sleeping safely within walls constructed from determination and love. It was not a perfect life. No life ever was, but it was a good life, a chosen life, built by two people who had been broken by loss and loneliness, but who had found wholeness in each other. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing changes and challenges as all years do, but the foundation William and Julia had built together proved unshakable. Charlotte married Thomas Brennan in a beautiful ceremony in 1903, the church overflowing with guests, the community celebrating the union of two respected families. William walked Charlotte down the aisle, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he gave away the daughter of his heart to a good man who would cherish her as she deserved. Samuel grew into a capable young man, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day ranch operations, allowing William to slow down slightly as his body began to show the wear of decades of hard labor. The twins married in a double ceremony in 1911, both choosing men from neighboring ranches, good families that William and Julia knew and trusted. Grandchildren arrived in abundance, filling the Hayes home with new generations of laughter and chaos. Through it all, William and Julia remained each other's constants, their love deepening and maturing through the seasons of their lives. They worked side by side until they could not anymore, then sat side by side watching younger generations carry forward the legacy they had established. They held grandchildren and told stories about the old days, about how they had met, about the bravery it took to build a life from ashes and determination. Charlotte, now a mother and eventually a grandmother herself, never forgot the day William Hayes had knelt before her in the dusty street and promised her she had a father now. She told her own children about that moment, about the cowboy who had appeared like an answer to desperate prayers, who had loved her mother with unwavering devotion, who had chosen them when he could have kept drifting. She made sure they understood that family was not just blood, that fathers were defined by presence and love rather than biology, that sometimes the most important moments in life happened in unexpected ways. William and Julia lived to see Oklahoma statehood in 1907, lived to see automobiles replace horses in town, lived to see the modern world slowly encroaching on the wild territories of their youth. But through all the changes, their ranch remained a constant, their family remained strong, their love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. On a quiet morning in 1928, William Hayes died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. Julia's hand clasped in his, 50 years of marriage completed, a life well lived brought to its natural close. Julia grieved deeply, but without regret, knowing that their years together had been everything she could have hoped for, that he had kept every promise he had ever made to her and Charlotte, that their love story had been worth every risk, every moment of vulnerability required to embrace it. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, the matriarch of a large and prosperous family. When she passed in 1933 at the age of 73, she was buried next to William on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, their graves marked by simple stones that read, William Hayes, beloved husband and father, and Julia Hayes, beloved wife and mother. But their story lived on, passed down through generations, a family legend about courage and second chances, about a widow struggling to survive and a drifter looking for purpose, about a little girl who had been mocked for having no father and the cowboy who had knelt and said she had one now. It became a touchstone for the Hayes family, a reminder of where they came from, of the strength it took to overcome hardship, of the power of love to transform lives. Charlotte lived until 1965. Dying at the age of 87, the last direct link to those early desperate days when she and her mother had barely survived from one season to the next. In her final years, she often sat on the porch of the house William had built, looking out over land that now supported dozens of Hayes family members. And she would tell anyone who would listen about the day everything changed. The day a stranger became her father. The day hope replaced despair. The ranch itself remained in the family for generations, parceled and divided as families grew but never sold to outsiders, kept within the Hayes lineage as a matter of pride and honor. The original house William and Julia built still stood into the 21st century, eventually converted into a family museum of sorts, filled with photographs and artifacts, preserving the history of two people who had dared to love despite loss, who had built something lasting from determination and faith. And sometimes, visitors to that old house would stand in the parlor where William and Julia had celebrated anniversaries and holidays, where they had raised their children and welcomed their grandchildren, and they would feel something in the air, something warm and enduring. The residue of great love lived fully and completely. They would look at the faded photographs on the walls. William strong and capable beside his roan horse, Julia beautiful and fierce with Charlotte as a little girl. The family gathered for celebrations, grandchildren playing in the yard, the visual history of a remarkable love story. The tale of her daughter was mocked for having no father, and the cowboy who knelt and said she had one now became more than just a family story. It became a testament to the enduring truth that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with simple acts of kindness, that defending the vulnerable matters, that love finds us when we stop running and allow ourselves to be found, that families are built not just through blood but through choice and commitment, and showing up day after day even when it is difficult. William and Julia Hayes had not been perfect people living a perfect life, but they had been real people living an authentic life, facing challenges with courage, loving each other with consistency, building something that lasted not just their lifetimes but generations beyond. They had proven that a struggling widow and a drifting cowboy could create a legacy that mattered, that their love story was worth telling and retelling, that the moment when William knelt before 7-year-old Charlotte and promised her she had a father now was the moment everything changed, not just for them but for all the Hayes descendants who followed. And in the ripple effects of one decision to stay rather than drift, to love rather than protect, to defend rather than ignore, there was a kind of immortality more meaningful than any monument or fortune. William and Julia Hayes had lived and loved and left the world better than they found it, had raised children who carried forward their values, had built a family that endured, and that was everything. Their story, beginning in 1885 in Stillwater, Oklahoma, with tears and mockery and a cowboy's intervention, had become something beautiful and lasting, proof that love truly could conquer, that families truly could heal, that second chances truly were possible if we were brave enough to reach for them. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth honoring for the simple, profound truth it contained. Sometimes all it takes to change a life is someone willing to kneel down, look a hurting child in the eye, and promise them they are not alone anymore, that they have a father now, that everything is going to be all right.